Every August, my wife packed her bags and flew south to see her family. Every August, I kissed her goodbye, watched her car disappear around the corner, and went back inside to my quiet house, trusting her completely. For 11 years, I did that. For 11 years, I believed her. And then one Thursday afternoon in Atlanta, Georgia, standing across the street from an upscale restaurant in Buckhead, I watched my wife walk through a door in a dress I had never seen before, laughing before she even reached the entrance, and greet another man the way you only greet someone who knows every single part of you. I was sitting in a rental car with a camera in my hand and 11 years of blind trust crumbling in my chest. But here's the truth nobody tells you about betrayal: it doesn't arrive like a thunderstorm. It arrives like a hairline crack in a foundation. So small you almost miss it. So quiet it hides behind everything you thought was solid. My name is Damon Price. I'm a structural engineer. I build things designed to last. And what I discovered that August afternoon in Atlanta wasn't just one man, in one restaurant. It was an entire parallel life, built beneath mine, carefully, patiently, over years, while I was home trusting the blueprints I'd been given. But what Lydia never understood, what she couldn't have calculated, was that the man she had quietly underestimated for 11 years had just opened his eyes. And when an engineer sees the cracks, he doesn't panic. He takes measurements. He documents everything. He builds his case one verified fact at a time. What I uncovered in the weeks that followed would expose not just an affair, but a financial conspiracy hidden inside my own marriage: $74,000, moved in careful, invisible increments over 4 years, and a family land worth more than $1 million that she had quietly been calculating since before we even said, "I do." She thought she was several steps ahead. She had no idea I had already reached the finish line. And what happened next, no one was prepared for. Before we continue, to our new viewers joining today, subscribe and say hello in the comments. I enjoy recognizing and welcoming members of our growing family. Today's warm shout-out goes to Patricia Broussard from the United States, Wanda from South Africa, and Juliet from Jamaica. Thank you for being part of our family. Subscribe now and comment below so I can welcome you too. Let me ask you something before we go any further. If your spouse took the same trip, to the same place, every single year for 11 years, would you ever question it? Most of us wouldn't. Because trust, real trust, doesn't look for reasons to doubt. It just believes. That was Damon Price. 42 years old. Structural engineer. A man whose entire professional life was built around one principle: if the math is solid, the structure holds. He had never once questioned Lydia's August trip. Not once. Not the first year. Not the 5th year. Not the 10th. She would pack her rolling carry-on. She would brew her morning tea. She would press a kiss to his temple and say, "I'll text when I land in Savannah." And she would leave. And Damon would go back to his blueprints. But here's what no one realized: the signs were always there. Hiding in plain sight. Dressed in the language of ordinary life. So when did Damon finally start to see them? The August she came back. Something was different. Not dramatically different. Not the kind of different that announces itself. It was the kind of different that only a man who notices hairline cracks in concrete would catch. She tilted her phone away when a message came in. Just slightly. Just enough. She laughed at something on her screen and didn't share it. 3 nights in a row, she slept facing the wall, something she had never done in 11 years of marriage. Were these things proof of anything? No. But they were data points. And Damon Price collected data. Then came the conversation about her sister Brenda's kitchen renovation. The marble countertops really open up the space, Lydia had said at dinner, describing Brenda's new kitchen in glowing detail. A week later, Damon casually mentioned the marble, just making conversation. Lydia blinked. Oh no, Brenda went with granite. Much more practical with the kids. She recovered smoothly. Launched into another story. Most husbands would have let it go. Damon Price let nothing go. Because here was the question forming in the back of his engineer's mind: if she lied about the countertops, what else is she lying about? And that question, that small, quiet, devastating question, was the beginning of everything. To understand what Damon did next, you have to understand who Damon Price was. He was not a suspicious man. He was not a jealous man. He was not the kind of husband who checked phones or demanded explanations for every hour unaccounted for. He was, at his core, a builder. He had grown up watching his father Jerome Price, a postman for 30 years, move through life with methodical dignity. Jerome was a man who memorized streets, who read houses, who understood that the most important things in life were not the dramatic moments, but the consistent ones. The daily ones. The ones that built something that lasted. Damon had inherited that patience. He had also inherited something else, 31 acres of Guilford County land that had been in the Price family since 1962. Land his grandfather had purchased when buying land as a black man in North Carolina required not just money, but courage. Land that had weathered economic downturns and development pressure and offers to sell for decades. Land that Jerome Price had never sold, never borrowed against, never compromised. That land was legacy. It was the kind of wealth that doesn't announce itself at dinner parties but quietly appreciates while everyone else is looking the other way. By the time Damon met Lydia, that land was worth over $1 million. But Damon didn't think about it that way. He just knew it was his father's land. His family's land. And one day it would be his. He met Lydia at an industry networking event. She was launching her event planning business, he was pitching a commercial development project. She was polished, quick, and magnetic in a room. She had the gift of making whoever she was talking to feel like the most interesting person present. Damon was quietly fascinated. They dated for 2 years. He proposed in the kitchen of the house he was designing for them, a house with exposed wooden beams and windows positioned specifically to catch the sunrise, because Lydia had once said she loved morning light. He built that house around her preferences. He should have noticed that, even then, he was doing most of the building. But here's the truth no one tells you about the early years of love: when something feels right, you don't audit it. You just live inside it. And their life together was genuinely good. Not perfect, no marriage is, but good. Lydia's business grew. Damon's firm earned its reputation on precision. They moved in comfortable rhythms. Morning coffee rituals. Evening walks. Dinner parties that Lydia orchestrated with the kind of effortless elegance that left guests wondering how she made it look so easy. There was one grief they shared and eventually stopped talking about, a nursery upstairs that became a home office after 3 years of trying and not succeeding. Some losses are too heavy to keep lifting. So you set them down, and you keep moving, and you love each other in the spaces between. The August trips had started in their 2nd year of marriage. Lydia's mother was in Savannah. Her sisters were there. It was natural, it was loving, it was exactly the kind of family devotion Damon respected. "Tell your mom I said hello," he would say every year. Of course, she would smile. And she would leave. But here's what Damon didn't know then, what he had never known, because Jerome Price carried it alone for 11 years like a quiet stone in his pocket. 2 years before the wedding, Lydia had driven to Jerome's house in Greensboro while Damon was at work. She had sat on that porch. She had asked Jerome about the family land, not casually, not incidentally, but with the focused precision of someone doing financial due diligence. How much is it worth? Will Damon inherit it directly? What's the trust structure? Jerome had told her it was complicated family property and left it at that. He hadn't told Damon. Because Damon was happy. And Jerome told himself maybe he was reading too much into the curiosity of a young woman being practical about her future. He would carry that decision for 11 years. And it would matter more than he knew. Because what Lydia had done that day on Jerome's porch wasn't just ask a question. She had taken out a blueprint. And she had started to build. But she didn't know that the man she was building around was paying closer attention than she ever imagined. 3 weeks after Lydia returned from her August trip, Damon sat alone in his home office at 8:17 p.m., staring at the login screen for their shared family email account. They had created it years ago for household logistics, utility bills, tax confirmations, subscription renewals. In 11 years of marriage, he had never felt the need to look at it with suspicious eyes. Tonight was different. His hands were steady as he typed the password. An engineer doesn't work on instinct alone. He works on data. And right now, the data had inconsistencies he couldn't explain away. The inbox loaded. He typed Lydia's name in the search bar. Most results were ordinary. A newsletter here. A purchase confirmation there. And then, one email stood out like a load-bearing calculation that didn't balance. A hotel booking confirmation. The Lius Hotel. Atlanta, Georgia. Guest, Lydia Price. Duration, 5 nights. The dates matched her Savannah trip exactly. Not Savannah. Atlanta. Damon leaned back in his chair and let that information settle into his chest like concrete setting in a form. Atlanta was not Savannah. Atlanta was not her mother. Atlanta was not the family visits he had spent 11 years nodding along to. He picked up his phone and called his mother-in-law. She answered on the second ring, warm as always. They talked about her garden, the weather. And then Damon carefully navigated to the question he needed answered. I know how much Lydia's visits mean to you. How long does she usually stay? A pause. Then, baby, Lydia hasn't been down here in almost 2 years. We keep trying to get her to come, but you know how busy she stays. 2 years. The words landed like a structural failure, silent at first, then total. 2 years of fabricated stories. 2 years of family dinners that never happened. 2 years of tell your mom I said hello to a woman who hadn't seen her daughter in 24 months. Damon thanked Miss Hargrove warmly, ended the call, and sat in the dark of his home office for 22 minutes without moving. Then he made a decision. He would not confront her. Not yet. He would not give her the chance to construct explanations he couldn't disprove. He would not swing in anger when anger would cost him everything. He would do what engineers do. He would go collect the evidence himself. And he would be patient. That's when everything shifted. The following August arrived with heavy Carolina heat. Tuesday morning, Damon watched Lydia pack her carry-on with practiced efficiency. She moved through their bedroom like a woman who had rehearsed this routine 100 times, because she had. Are you sure you don't want me to drive you to the airport? He asked. No need. You know how I like my routine. She kissed his cheek. Her perfume lingered. She walked down the front path, waved, and pulled away. The moment her car disappeared around the corner, Damon went to his home office and opened his laptop. Wednesday morning, he called in his first personal day in 8 months. He had already booked his flight to Atlanta under his own name. He had already chosen a hotel separate from hers. He had already found, buried in the drafts folder of their shared email account, an itinerary note listing several Atlanta locations and times, including a Thursday lunch at an upscale restaurant in Buckhead. He had memorized the address. He had studied the street view. He had identified exactly where to park. An engineer doesn't improvise a site inspection. He prepares. Thursday afternoon found him in a rental car, positioned across from the restaurant, air conditioning humming quietly, hands steady on the wheel. At 12:47 p.m., Lydia appeared on the sidewalk. She wore a navy blue dress he had never seen before. Fitted. Professional. Chosen with care. Her laughter carried across the street before she even reached the entrance, and Damon couldn't see the message that made her smile at her phone that way, but he understood its meaning. Then Warren Cole stepped out of the restaurant to meet her. Tall. Well-dressed. Moving with the easy confidence of a man who was used to commanding rooms. What happened next was not ambiguous. Cole's hand found the small of Lydia's back with a familiarity that spoke of hundreds of rehearsals. When he leaned in to kiss her, it wasn't a greeting between colleagues. It wasn't tentative. It was the kiss of a man who knew exactly how she would respond, because he always had. Damon lifted his phone. He took photographs. Not in blind rage, though the rage was there, buried deep beneath layers of focused precision, but with the same methodical care he brought to documenting structural defects on a job site. He needed evidence. He needed confirmation. 4 minutes of documentation gave him both. If you're still feeling this with me right now, comment I'm still here. That evening, back in his hotel room, Damon sat on the edge of the bed as darkness filled the room. He didn't turn on the lights. The club sandwich on the desk went untouched. He gave himself one night. One night to feel the full weight of what he now knew, 11 years of shared mornings and holiday traditions and quiet Sundays, all of it now layered over with the knowledge that she had been building something else entirely, somewhere else, with someone else. One night to grieve what he thought his marriage was. Because tomorrow required strategy. And strategy demanded clarity. Friday morning, he sat in the rental car and pulled up property records on his phone. He had found, through careful research, an LLC name connected to Warren Cole. That LLC led him to a Midtown Atlanta address. A gleaming high-rise of glass and steel. County records told the rest of the story. The condo was jointly owned by the LLC. The LLC had two managing members. Warren Cole and Lydia Price. His wife didn't just have a lover in Atlanta. She had co-signed on a life. She had purchased property, used their money to do it, and built a foundation in a city he never knew she considered a second home. And that's when everything changed. For days later, Damon stood in the airport arrivals hall and watched Lydia walk toward him with her rolling carry-on, smiling when she saw him. She quickened her pace. Hugged him. Her perfume was the same as when she'd left. "Welcome home," he said, taking her bag. She talked all the way to the car about her week in Savannah, her mother's garden, her sister's children, a restaurant they'd all gone to together. Details layered over details, the architecture of a story designed to hold weight. Damon responded in all the right places. Asked the right follow-up questions. Laughed at the right moments. She believed she was coming home to the same man she'd left. She was wrong. The next morning, her coffee was waiting in her favorite cream-colored mug, splash of almond milk, no sugar, exactly as always. "You're the best," she said over the rim. "Just keeping to routine," he replied. But here's the truth no one in that kitchen knew. Beneath the surface of that ordinary morning, Damon Price had already made his first moves. He was simply waiting for the right moment to play them. 3 days after Lydia's return, Damon sat across from Audra Banks in a quiet corner booth at Carson's Bar, 3 blocks from their office, the kind of place where the happy hour crowd actually lets you finish a sentence. Audra was the most discreet person he knew. 6 years as colleagues had built a friendship on a foundation of directness and loyalty. When Damon finished telling her everything, Atlanta, Warren Cole, the condo, she didn't gasp. She didn't flinch. She just looked at him and said the 4 words he needed. "What do you need?" "A forensic accountant," he said. "Someone thorough and discreet." Within 24 hours, he was seated across from Patricia Osei, whose office was as organized and precise as she was. She asked the right questions. She requested the right documents. And 2 weeks later, she called him back. He sat down across from her as she laid out the spreadsheets. "Over the past 4 years," Patricia said quietly, "there's been a pattern of transfers from your joint savings account to a separate account at First Regional Bank." She pointed to the highlighted rows. Different amounts every time. $267. $543. $891. Never the same number twice. Never large enough to draw attention in any given month. Total amount transferred, $74,000. Damon sat perfectly still. The account is in Lydia's name only. The pattern suggests deliberate accumulation, an exit strategy. An exit strategy. His wife hadn't just been unfaithful. She had been leaving, one invisible withdrawal at a time, for 4 years, building a financial runway out of their shared life without ever saying a word. And $22,000 of that diverted money had gone directly toward the down payment on the Atlanta condo. Their marriage's money. Used to build her escape. But that wasn't the worst part. Because as Damon reviewed Patricia's report that night over a dinner he barely tasted, he realized something that changed the entire shape of what he was looking at. This wasn't impulsive. This wasn't passion running away with someone's better judgment. This was architecture. This was planning. This was the work of someone who had been thinking about the exit long before she started walking toward it. The question was, how long? And the answer to that question was sitting 60 miles away in Greensboro, in a wooden rocking chair on a covered porch, waiting for the right moment to tell his son the truth. The drive to Greensboro felt like a meditation. Fields rolled past the window. Harvested cornfields cast long afternoon shadows. Damon had driven this road hundreds of times, always with Lydia beside him, usually for holidays, always with the comfortable ease of a couple with nothing to hide. Today he drove alone. Jerome Price was already on the porch when Damon pulled into the gravel driveway. Seated in his usual wooden rocker, as if he'd been waiting. Because he had been. They sat together for a moment in the comfortable silence that only fathers and sons can share, watching a cardinal move between the bird feeders Jerome maintained with the same meticulous care he'd once given his postal route. "You didn't bring Lydia," Jerome finally said. It wasn't a question. It was an observation from a man who had spent 30 years learning to read the small details of a route. "No," Damon said. "I need to tell you something." And I need you to just listen first. Jerome folded his hands in his lap and nodded once. Damon told him everything. Atlanta. Warren Cole. The property records. Patricia's financial report. All of it, laid out in sequence, with the measured clarity of a man who had organized his pain into documents. Jerome listened without moving. When Damon finished, his father was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you 11 years ago." And what Jerome said next, sitting in the fading afternoon light, with the cardinals singing softly from the feeder, reframed everything Damon thought he understood about his own marriage. 2 years before your wedding, Jerome said slowly, Lydia came to see me here on this porch while you were at work. She asked me about the land. The land. 31 acres of Guilford County. The Price family's most significant asset. She wanted to know its value. Whether you'd inherit it directly. What the trust structure looked like. Damon's voice was very quiet. What did you tell her? That it was complicated family property. Jerome paused. I didn't tell you about the conversation because you were happy. Because I told myself maybe I was reading too much into it. He shook his head slowly. I've carried that decision for 11 years, son. They sat with that truth as the sun began to set, painting the sky in orange and purple above the land that had stood through 60 years of Price family history, and that someone had been quietly pricing out before the ink on a marriage certificate was even dry. The land was now worth $1.3 million. Lydia had known something like that was coming before she ever said I love you. She hadn't just fallen for Damon Price. She had assessed him. Like a financial prospectus. And what she was about to discover, too late, was that the asset she had been maneuvering toward for over a decade was already protected in ways she had never anticipated. What no one realized, was that Jerome Price had already made a phone call. Monday morning arrived with the kind of autumn clarity that makes everything feel sharper. Damon sat in the waiting room of Philip Okafor's law office with a leather portfolio on his lap, months of careful documentation organized by date and purpose. Philip was younger than Damon expected. Mid-30s. Contained energy. The kind of lawyer who made precision look effortless. Damon laid the documents out in sequence. Hotel records. Dates and times. The Atlanta property deed showing Lydia's co-ownership with Warren Cole. Patricia Osei's detailed financial analysis, $74,000 extracted in careful increments over 4 years. Philip studied the forensic accounting report. The financial diversion is particularly significant, he said, leaning forward. This constitutes clear marital asset dissipation. She systematically removed funds from joint accounts without disclosure or agreement. That substantially strengthens your position. There's more, Damon said. He described Jerome's account of Lydia's premarital inquiry about the family land. As he spoke, he watched Philip's expression shift with quiet intensity. The timing of this is critical, Philip said. If she files first, she could attempt to claim the Guilford County property as a marital asset. Has your father started the trust restructuring? His attorney began the paperwork this morning. Good. If that completes before any filing, the land should be protected. Everything Damon had built, every document, every disclosure, every careful step, was assembling into something that Lydia had no idea was coming. She believed she was the one with a plan. She had no idea his was already several moves ahead of hers. A Monday afternoon, weeks into the process, Damon stopped home during lunch to pick up documents he'd left in his home office. The landline blinked. They rarely used it anymore. He pressed play. Good morning, Mrs. Price. This is Amanda calling from Davidson and Wheeler Law Offices to confirm your consultation appointment for Thursday at 2 p.m. with Sarah Wheeler. If you need to reschedule, please call us back at. Damon let the message play out completely. Then he played it again. Davidson and Wheeler was a prominent family law firm. She was filing first. She was moving to shape the narrative before he even knew the ground was shifting. In her mind, she was still the one controlling this story. He picked up his phone and called Philip Okafor. She's meeting with divorce attorneys on Thursday, he said, without preamble. We can file today, Philip replied immediately. Everything's prepared. Not yet, Damon said. I need 1 more week. There's something specific that has to happen first. He ended the call. Made 2 more. The first to Brenda, Lydia's sister, whose quiet perceptiveness Damon had always respected. "Brenda, it's Damon. I need you to come to Charlotte next weekend. There's something you need to hear. I need you there as a witness." A pause. Then, "I've been waiting for this call for longer than you know. I'll be there Saturday morning." The second call was to Jerome. "Dad. It's time. Next Saturday." Jerome's answer came without hesitation. "Already on my way. Been keeping a bag in the car since we talked." Saturday arrived with a crystalline October clarity. The kind of morning that makes things feel inevitable. At 9 a.m., Jerome's truck pulled into the driveway. At 9:45, Brenda's car appeared. At 10 o'clock, Lydia came downstairs, dressed casually but well, the way she always dressed for family gatherings. Her social radar fired the moment she saw the room. 3 people seated. No food. No celebration. Just waiting. "What's going on?" she asked, calculating possibilities even as she smiled. "Sit down, please," Damon said quietly. She sat. And then Damon Price, the man who had spent 11 years building things, trusting blueprints, believing in solid foundations, laid out the truth with the precision of a man who had been preparing for exactly this moment. The Atlanta trip. Warren Cole. The photographs slid across the coffee table, clear, unambiguous. Lydia's hand reached toward them and stopped halfway. "Warren and I have been close for a long time. It's complicated. We can get counseling. There's more." Patricia's financial report. $74,000 in documented transfers. The pattern spread across years of careful, invisible withdrawals. The condo deed. Her name. Warren's name. Their marital money in the down payment. Lydia's composure fractured, just slightly, the way a foundation shows its first crack, not dramatically, but unmistakably. "My attorney filed divorce papers yesterday," Damon said, his voice carrying no rage, only finality. "The family land has already been moved into a protected trust structure. Any claim you might try to make on it will fail. And yes, I know about your consultation at Davidson and Wheeler on Thursday." The room was absolutely still. Brenda, who had sat motionless through all of it, finally spoke. "How long?" Lydia turned to her sister. Perhaps looking for a fragment of alliance. What she found instead was a woman who had driven 5 hours not to defend her, but to witness the truth. Lydia's silence was the only answer she gave. Brenda stood. "Keys already in hand. I drove 5 hours for you." Nothing more needed saying. She walked to the guest room and closed the door quietly behind her. Jerome looked at his son. "You handled that like a man." For words that contained everything a father could say. But here's the revelation that reframes everything. In the weeks that followed, as Audra continued compiling research on Warren Cole, she uncovered something Damon hadn't anticipated, something that changed the shape of the entire story. Warren Cole was not a wealthy man conducting a smooth second life. He was a mid-level developer with moderate professional success and no particular distinction. His firm handled mid-sized commercial projects. Nothing spectacular. But the detail that mattered was personal. Warren Cole was married to Dana Cole, a pediatric nurse at Children's Healthcare of Atlanta. They had 2 children, ages 8 and 11. And based on Dana's social media, she had no idea her husband co-owned property with another woman. Let that land for a moment. Lydia hadn't left Damon for a man with more to offer. She had traded a faithful husband building a legitimate life, a man with $1 million family legacy, professional standing, and quiet integrity, for a married man of modest means who was lying to both of them simultaneously. The life she had sacrificed everything to build had been constructed on the same foundation of deception she had used against Damon. She had been deceived by the man she chose to deceive her husband with. And it didn't end there. The Atlanta condo, the one she had co-signed on, the one she had funneled $22,000 of marital funds into, had been listed for sale 6 weeks earlier. Right around the time of Lydia's last Atlanta trip. Warren wasn't just lying to Dana. He was liquidating the parallel life he'd built with Lydia, too. She wasn't his future. She was a chapter he was closing. Lydia had dismantled her marriage, diverted $74,000, co-purchased property in another city, built an entire shadow life, and the man she built it with had already started packing it up without telling her. The life she thought she was escaping to didn't exist anymore. The life she had destroyed was the real one. And she had no idea. The legal process unfolded with the same measured precision that had marked every step of Damon's approach. Philip Okafor was thorough and unflappable. The dissipation of $74,000 in marital assets, clearly documented, clearly intentional, substantially altered the settlement. The undisclosed income Lydia had earned as a contracted interior design consultant on Warren's Atlanta projects, income never reported on joint tax filings, created additional complications. Undisclosed income during marriage is a serious matter, Philip noted. The Charlotte home, which Damon had helped design, held primary equity in, was sold, proceeds distributed according to the original investment ratio. Lydia retained her personal accounts, her car, her contracted business equipment. It was mathematics, not malice. Numbers that told their own story. But there are some costs that don't appear on settlement documents. Damon sat in his half-empty house for several evenings after Lydia moved out, and he felt the specific weight of 11 years of genuine moments suddenly complicated by the question, which ones were real? The morning coffees, were those real? The evening walks, those felt real. The grief they had shared over the nursery upstairs, that was absolutely real. He had to allow that some of it was true, even inside the lie. Because denying that would mean she had taken not just the years, but the good ones too. And he wasn't willing to give her those. The professional consequences for Lydia and Warren arrived like quiet tremors. Marcus Chen, a Charlotte developer who had worked with Damon on several projects, asked about Warren Cole's firm during a casual lunch. Damon didn't embellish. He stated documented facts. The undisclosed consulting arrangements. The property co-ownership. The timeline. Marcus drew his own conclusions. 2 weeks later, Warren's firm lost an anchor contract worth millions in potential projects. Lydia's event planning business felt similar aftershocks. Charlotte's professional circles overlapped like Venn diagrams. Word moved through them the way water finds its level. Damon had never spoken an untrue word about her. The truth had simply become known. Brenda's role in the aftermath was equally measured. She met Lydia for coffee on neutral ground, not to take sides, but to say what needed saying. What you did wasn't just to Damon. It was to everyone who trusted you. Don't ask me to help you rebuild that trust until you understand the difference. Warren's marriage to Dana did not survive. Dana filed for divorce within months. His professional standing never fully recovered. Lydia relocated to Atlanta, to a city she had spent years building a second life in. But that life was gone now, sold off by the man who had been quietly exiting it. She was learning to live in a narrower world than the one she had imagined for herself. And Damon? When the call came, "It's done, the judge signed the final decree this morning," he was sitting at his kitchen table. The same table where the marble countertop story first snagged on something in his engineer's mind. He set the phone down on the polished wood. Let the finality settle into the quiet. Then he stood up, walked to his desk, and went back to work. But the story doesn't end with a gavel and a signed decree. It ends on 31 acres of Guilford County land, on an October morning, with a father and a son standing side by side over a site plan spread across the hood of a pickup truck. 4 modest homes. Built around the old oak trees, not through them. Affordable housing for 4 families who needed a solid foundation. Damon had committed both his professional expertise and his own capital to the project. He had poured the same quiet precision into this that he had poured into everything, the house he designed for Lydia, the years he gave her, the process that dissolved their marriage. "These homes are going to change lives," Jerome said, studying the plans. "That's the idea," Damon said. Sunday dinners with Jerome had become sacred. Audra's friendship had deepened into something neither of them had to maintain, it just existed, easy and reliable, like a well-built structure. He had moved into a smaller place closer to his office. 2 bedrooms. Good natural light. No memories in the walls. It suited him completely. His firm noticed the steady strength he had shown through everything. 3 months after the divorce was final, they offered him a senior position, overseeing structural integrity on their largest project to date. He accepted without hesitation. On that October morning, standing on the land his grandfather had purchased with courage and hope 60 years earlier, Damon looked out over the trees wearing their fall colors and said something quietly to himself. "I fixed it." He meant the land. He meant the project. He meant the future taking shape in careful measurements. But he also meant himself. And that's when he realized, the truth didn't just cost her everything she thought she'd secured. It returned to him everything he hadn't known he'd lost. Now I want to ask you something, and I want you to be honest in the comments. What would you have done in Damon's position? The moment he found that hotel confirmation, would you have confronted her immediately? Or would you have done what he did, gathered the evidence, secured the assets, and waited for the right moment? And here's the harder question, was Lydia always this person? Or did the empty nursery, the long years, the quiet grief of an unfulfilled life, slowly make her someone she never intended to become? I'm not asking you to forgive her. I'm asking you to look at the full picture. Which moment in this story hit you the hardest? Was it Jerome's confession on the porch, 11 years of silence finally breaking? Was it the moment Damon realized Warren was already selling the condo? Or was it the quiet ending, a man standing on family land, deciding to build something that mattered? Tell me in the comments. Because the conversation you start down there is part of this story too. And one more thing, if you thought this story carried weight, wait until you hear what happened when a retired schoolteacher discovered her late husband had been living a double life for 30 years, and the secret he left behind in his will changed everything for 3 families who had never met each other. That story goes up next. And I promise you, you will not see the ending coming. Subscribe so you don't miss it. And if this story stayed with you, if it made you think about trust, or patience, or what it means to build something that lasts, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Because the best stories don't just entertain us. They remind us who we want to be. Subscribe for stories that stay with you long after they end.